Alright, in this video, it's time to take a look at actor selections. In the last video, we had put together the beginning of our scene editor, and of course the scene's editor's purpose is to allow us to interact with actors. Now, in order to do mouse-based interaction, it's going to be very important to have the concept of selection. That is the ability to select one or more actors so that we can work with them. So in this video, we're going to put together the code that will be necessary to handle selections. This will be code that's going to remember everything that is currently selected, and it is also going to give us the functionality that will allow us to select and deselect actors. Now, before we jump in, let's talk briefly about how we're going to organize this code. In order to integrate this code tightly with the actor class, we're actually going to implement the code as part of the actor class. That way, any given actor will be able to tell whether or not it is selected. Now, for the sake of organization here in our project, we're actually going to split actor up into a partial class. The reason we'll do this is that way we can keep all the game-oriented code as it currently appears up here in actor. We can leave this alone and avoid cluttering it with editor-based code. However, if we keep all the selection code, the editor code, you could say, in the actor class, again, that keeps the tight integration and actor is able to tell how selections are working. So, let's jump in and begin by redefining actor to be a partial class. Beginning here in the actor.cs file, I'm going to change the definition here to include the modifier partial. Doing this will allow us to spread the definition of the actor class over multiple CS code files. Alright, now for the code file that's going to contain all of the actor selection. Up here in Editor, we will right-click and add a new class. And for this class, we'll call this actor selection. So that's actorselection.cs. We'll let that add in. We'll do our usual and we'll clean up the subnamespace. Now for the actor definition, in this case we're not actually intending to have a class named actor selection, rather we want to continue working on the partial actor class. So I'm going to pull the selection part of the name out and add partial to the class definition here. So here inside of actor, we're now looking at the real actual actor, so we should be able to see things like, for example, I'm going to drop down just a simple method to demonstrate how this is really working as part of the actor class. So we could make a method called void stuff, and inside of this method we can see we can access the this reference, and looking at this we have things like the behavior list, color, direction, origin, all of the various members of the actor class. So as far as any of our other code is concerned, this is just an extension of actor. In this partial class, we just continue to work on the one and only actor class. Now again, this gives us a perfect place to organize all of our editor code, since we can now implement selections in a way that doesn't obscure or hinder the main actor code. Alright, so to begin with the selection code itself, the way selections will be handled will be with a simple actor list. We do want to be able to handle multiple actor selections, so we're going to set up a list and we'll call that list the selection list. So we can go ahead and define that. We'll set up a public static list of actors, and we will call this list selection. And we'll turn around and instantiate this as a new list of actor. So really, as far as data is concerned, this is really the master data container for all selections. The idea is that if an actor appears in the selection list, it is considered to be selected. Having everything based off of a single reference point keeps everything nice and clean, and also helps avoid bugs, since we don't have to worry about keeping multiple things in sync. Now, to move on from the selection list, the remainder of the code and properties we place into this class should primarily be just extensions and helpers to allow us to gain easier access to the things in this list. What I mean by that is it's easier to call an instance member called select rather than always messing with the full list by hand elsewhere in code. Now, the first of these properties is going to be an actor property called last selected. With our selection list, it's generally very helpful to be able to grab the first or the last actor that is currently selected. It's very useful for interactive operations. Now, the first actor is very easy to get to because we can always say selection sub 0, and that gives us the first actor, so it's a very concise piece of code. To get to the last actor, we would have to use selection and then reference selection.count -1 for our item index, and that's a little less intuitive. So we're going to give ourselves a property that will give us easy access to the last actor that is selected. So here we will create a public static property. It will be of type actor, and the property name will be last selected. Inside of this last selected property, we will place a get accessor, and this get accessor is responsible for returning the last item that appears in the selection list. In addition to this, we're also going to do a check and make sure that we do have items in the selection before we attempt to return, and that avoids throwing an exception from this point in code if we were to try to use last selected with no actors in the selection list. So we will begin with an if statement check saying if selection.count is greater than 0, or excuse me, is equal to 0, meaning we have no actors selected, we will simply return null. And the idea is that anyone using last selected, it will be their responsibility to make sure that last selected is not null before they try to do something with that. Or, if they use last selected without checking, at least the null reference exception that gets generated will happen in the relevant place in code rather in the middle of this property. Now, here if we do have actors in the selection list, of course, then we can grab the last of those. So here we will put together a return statement where we return selection, then give subindex of selection.count -1. And that will give us the last element in the selection list. So once again, you can view this as a shorthand property allowing easier access to this syntax. Alright, moving on. Now we're going to set up a series of instance methods to be used with the actor class that will make it easier to work with selections, things like selecting, deselecting, and so forth. The first of these is going to be an instance property called isSelected. So let's put this together as a public Boolean property called isSelected. And we'll set up the accessor here in line with the property declaration. So we'll put together a get accessor. Then inside of this get accessor, we will return selection.contains and then pass in this reference. Terminate the statement, and then 2 closing brackets to finish off both the accessor and the property. So basically what's happening here is, since we're using selection as the only way of noting selected data, this isn't opposed to saying that each actor also has a Boolean field that is selected. The reason I didn't want to do that is, again, synchronization. I didn't want a scenario where you could say that an actor is selected by its field and not appear in the selection list, because then you'd have an inconsistent state. Now, since everything is dependent on this list, if you were to ask an actor and say, are you selected, that actor has to look into the selection list and say, hey, am I in this list? So that's where we're doing selection.contains ourselves as this. Alright, moving on from here, let's put together the methods that we'll use to work with selections, beginning with the select method. Let's put together a public method, void return type, called select. So the idea here is that we just call actor.select, and then everything behind the scenes gets handled properly so that the actor becomes selected. So what we'll do here is, in order to make an actor become selected, he needs to get added to this list. Now we want to avoid a scenario where an actor appears in the selected list multiple times, because we haven't really defined what that should mean. Being selected multiple times isn't a concept we're going to implement. So before we add ourselves to the selection list, we're going to check and make sure that we are not currently selected. So we say if not this.isSelected. Actually, with that being a property, we don't need the parentheses. And we should not need any braces either, since this will be a single statement. So if not this dot selected, then we'll take our selection list and add ourselves to it. So selection dot add this. So very simple. Just again making it to where we never, well, no, I won't say never, but generally we don't have to work directly with the selection list. We can just use actors themselves in order to add and remove them to the selection. Now, the counterpart to select is going to be deselect, an operation that will remove ourselves from the selected list. So let's put together another method, public void deselect. Now with deselect, we don't have to worry about doing a check to see if we're selected first. We can simply directly tell the list to remove ourselves, so selection.remove this. So we remove ourselves from the list, and it is safe to call this even if we aren't already in the list. Looking at the return type here, we have a Boolean return. So basically, all the remove is going to do is tell us whether or not we were actually able to remove this actor from the list. So in a worst case scenario of calling deselect on a non-selected actor, we simply get a return type that we don't use. We don't run into any error scenario. And since we're already not in the list, we don't have the multiple selection problem. Alright, one last method to put together is going to be toggle select. In a case where we don't want to check for selection, we would simply like the actor to become selected if it's not, or become deselected if it is selected. So let's put together a public void method called toggle select. Now, of course, inside of toggle select, we need to see if we are currently selected so we know what operation to do. So we say if this dot is selected, then we need to deselect. So we will tell the selection to remove ourselves. Selection.remove this. Otherwise, we'll drop in an else statement and we will add ourselves to the selection. So selection.add this. Alright, that takes care of selection, deselection, and toggling our selections. So this section of code is all that we're going to have, all that will consist of actor selection as far as the actor class is concerned. Let me build briefly to make sure that the file gets saved out. Now to show these selections in action, we're going to set up the actor's draw method so that it is selection aware. We've already defined a selection color in the style class, so we'll employ that now in the draw method inside of actor. Of course, to get to this draw method, currently we have that defined in the actor.cs file here at the bottom. Let's jump up before we do the rotation and drawing, and let's put together a color variable. We'll call this variable color, and we will begin by simply setting it to the current color of the actor, which is this dot color. Now we'll do a check and see whether or not we are selected. So we'll say if this dot is selected, then we need to use the selection color instead. So we'll change the color variable to be equal to style.selectionColor. Now that we've decided on the appropriate color to use when drawing the actor, let's make sure that we use this variable when we actually invoke our spritebatch draw call. So down here in spritebatch.draw, I'm simply going to replace this .color with the color variable. Once again, we can briefly build. The file gets saved out. And that is all we need to do for the selection code inside of actor. Now, before we bring this video to a close, let's do a quick demonstration to show how selection is currently working. Now, at the moment, it's not going to be interactive because we don't have mouse input fully set up in the scene editor. But just to show that things can be selected or not selected and have their colors reflect that state, we could briefly jump into the scene. That is the original scene navigation we've been working on. Here in a moment we could clean up some of our tabs as we're starting to have quite a few code files open. Alright, inside of scene navigation, let's jump in right after we create the scene editor, and let's create a few actors just to give some actors to play around with. We'll use a for loop to create 3 actors. We can use the index variable I and loop until our count is 3. Then inside of this loop, we'll define an actor variable, which we will call actor, and we will turn around and instantiate a new actor. For the texture, let's give the standard style.arrowTexture and a color of white. Then let's set the actor's position closer to the center of the screen. So we'll take our actor and set its position to be equal to a new vector2, and we'll use the index variable I to spread these out in position a little bit. So we'll actually take I times 100 to give 100 pixels distance between each actor, and then in addition to that, we'll offset by 300 pixels to move towards the center of the screen. Also in Y, we will set a value of 300 pixels. So we should get a horizontal row of actors. Alright, just to see what these actors look like, let's build and run the game. And we can see that we do indeed have 3 actors, drawing with the standard white color. And of course their textures are white and gray. Now, for the selection, let's test out some selections. Now, we can't easily access the single actor variable. We can't use that to access 3 individual actors, so we'll simply look directly into the actors list. Since we know that our scene is otherwise empty, aside from these 3 actors, we can simply talk to actor.actors and then address individual sub-elements. For example, we could take actors sub 0, so the first actor in our scene, and tell it to select. If we do this, we can see we have our 3 actors, and the first one draws with a green color. So we are indicating that that is the selected actor. Now, of course, we could select more than one actor. We could duplicate this line of code, select both actors 0 and 1. Now, 2 of them appear selected. And, of course, we could grab all of the actors by grabbing actor sub 2. We can see all 3 of them are selected. And now we could select any combination of these. We could pull out the selection for 1, select just 0 and 2, so we can easily see how actor selection is working, and the fact that selected state is actually managed by the actors themselves. So everything is managed internally as far as being able to select and deselect actors. So with that, we've got our selection code in place. We've tested it out and seen it functioning here in the scene navigation class. With that, we're done with the test code. So we're actually going to pull that out to make sure it doesn't interfere with the code we'll be creating in later videos. And let's see, let's build, make sure everything gets saved out. And with that, that's going to wrap up this video.